Hi, and welcome to Literary Hype. I am Stephanie, your Literary Hype Woman, and today's author conversation features an author who's kind of blending genres a little bit and raising some interesting questions. Erin Lane wrote this book called Someone Other Than a Mother, Flipping the Scripts on a Woman's Purpose and Making Meaning Beyond Motherhood. It kind of tackles her journey, so it's part memoir as she went from being child-free for the common good to now being a parent of 3 adopted daughters, but also like the questions that come up and the research that she put into it. It's a really interesting read. So here's my conversation with Erin Lane. Hello!
Hello, Stephanie C.
Well, welcome to Literary Hype. For those who haven't heard of you, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and what you do?
Sure. I'm an author, vocational facilitator, which is just a fancy name for I help people discern questions of purpose. And I'm a formerly child-free, unexpected adoptive parent of 3.
And that really plays into your book that your latest release, Someone Other Than a Mother. Can I talk about what this book is about?
Yeah, so I wrote this book, Someone Other Than a Mother, Flipping the Scripts on a Woman's Purpose and Making Meaning Beyond Motherhood, after I became a mom. I'm not a huge fan of the word mom, though. After I became a parent, after a decade of being happily, mostly child-free, and became a parent in this very unexpected way. My husband and I fostered, thinking we would just be these capital A adults in a kid's life. And then very quickly, our first placement turned into adoption. And it wasn't until I was legally recognized as a parent that I felt like people got really excited about my life. And at first, that felt really good to be included in a club I suspected existed, but couldn't be sure when I didn't have children. And then finally, when I got admission, I was like, ooh, now people are talking to me about their lives. Now sermons make sense. Now casseroles are coming out of the woodwork. But eventually that just just made me really sad, and made me really mad, and made me wonder what was so uncompelling about my life before children. So I set out to write a book about the scripts women get, that valorize the experience of motherhood, that demonize the experience of being childless or child-free, and really exploring chapter by chapter how each of these scripts that are taken to be universally true actually don't fit many of our lived experiences, actually are not good for moms or non-moms in the end, and how can we rewrite a truer, weirder, kinder story about who we are when we're not who the world expects.
It's such an interesting topic. Like, I marked this sucker up as coming from a homeschool background in the faith culture. Like, you are nothing without children. It's like, when are you getting married? When are you having kids? Is still to this day constant refrain. How does the faith community, like, you write this from a somewhat faith perspective, how specifically does faith play into this narrative of you're really not that interesting until you have kids?
Yeah. Well, the book starts mother or mother superior. Those were the 2 life choices I felt like were possible for a young Catholic girl growing up in the American Midwest, and then quickly realizing that like neither one of those really fit who I felt like I was made to be. And so wrestling with that as both a person and then eventually a theologian. So, again, just a fancy word for someone that studies what people think about God. I'm very curious how religion informs these mother scripts, as I call them, both as someone who cares deeply about faith being used for the good of the world rather than for harm or shame or exclusion or division, but also because I'm also an anthropologist by training. I'm all the big words that mean nothing, and very into the research that said the people that experience the most stigma for being childless are religious women. So even though the book, I hope, is interesting to anyone that finds themselves as an inheritor of these scripts, whether religious or not, I did want to make sure I addressed some of the religious stigma that women experience, everything from interpreting certain sacred scriptures like be fruitful and multiply to mean that we have a universal command to procreate. I'm like, well, I don't know. Let's look at that. Actually, this seems to be more about nation making than individual woman baby making. Like, how can we take some of these scripts that have both secular and sacred implications and tease out who's benefiting from these? And I think that's one of the questions I learned to ask after reading these after writing this book, is like, who does it serve to tell women that mother love is a superior love? Oh, interesting. It serves nations, it serves religions, it serves men to hype women for doing the thing that they can't do. So of course, this would be something that people throughout history would have valorized. And it makes sense that a lot of women, we would want to valorize it too, because it is historically has been a uniquely female offering, especially if you do it the biological way. And yeah, it makes sense that we would want to valorize something that in some ways has been very hyped, but very undersupported. So there's a lot of complicated narratives that are shaping the cultural scripts we get around what makes a good life and what role motherhood plays in that.
I really loved your observation about the Disney villains. And the Disney villains are the ones without kids of their own. And I mentioned that at work today. Everyone was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
So what kind of process did you go through for your research and kind of like fleshing out these like little light bulb moments?
Yeah, right. Disney villains, right, are all, as I like to say, either childless or jealously parenting someone else's children. Yeah, we there seems to be this easy dichotomy that those who parent are saintly. If you're female identified, you are very relatable and sympathetic and a great protagonist if you're a parent. And if you're not, then there's something suspicious or defective or deformed or unsympathetic about your life that makes for the good villain arc. Yeah, so some of that is just observational, right? Realizing at some point, oh, interesting. There's a whole trope here that I've been sold. But the way the chapters fleshed out, everyone being a shitty script we've been given, and then trying to write a more generous rewrite, just really came from my own experience being child-free for 10 years and the kinds of things I heard from your biological clock is ticking, to home is your highest duty, to motherhood is the toughest job, so why are you so lazy? To things that seem pretty positive, like, but you'd make a great mom. The but being the key word, but I don't want to become a mother. So why is it so important to you to convince me to do this one thing? You're not telling me I'd make a great air traffic controller, right? So why is this the thing I'm somehow not confident in my own abilities to do? Or even more insidious ones, like it'll be different with your own. So just go ahead and do it. If you think you don't like kids, it doesn't matter. Parent your own. It'll all be different. Or like you'll regret it when you're older, which is, a terrible, terrible thing to say to someone because there's really no way to test it than to do it. And then once you've done it, you've done it, right? Nobody wins if you end up regretting that. So just really, I wrote this book about the 9 scripts that were most alive in my own life, primarily before I became a parent. And then trying to parse each one to say, here's the work it did on me when I wasn't a parent. Here's the shame it induced, the doubt it elicited, the feelings of disbelonging it created in me. And honestly, here are the ways after I've become a parent that I'm still wrestling with what that means that parenting is supposed to be a job, or that now that I have kids, I'm not supposed to be able to talk about any regrets I have around that life. Yeah, that it's just really damaging to have one dominant story where any one group is all good or all bad. It doesn't really allow for the myriad ways that, as Rebecca Solnit says, a life can flourish or wither.
This book feels like a blend of academic and memoir. And you're very vulnerable with your story and like open about where you were in different, like where your brain was in a lot of these points in your story. What was it like for you writing such a vulnerable book?
Yeah, it was terrible. It was totally terrible. I mean, I wrote it during a pandemic. So on the one hand, I think this book saved my life. It gave me something to do every day. It gave me a way to order my time. It gave me a reason to keep facing my life rather than avoiding my life with jars of wine at 4 p.m. So on the one hand, like that, I felt really lucky in a weird way to have this big, insurmountable, overwhelming project to work on during a pandemic. Yeah, because it rooted me and it tethered me in some ways. In other ways, I think I experienced what a lot of us experienced during the pandemic, which was a total loss of perspective and the inability to actually know if anything I was doing was good, if anything I was writing was landing, if anything I was saying was actually the truth. And so, yeah, it was a really tough book to write. I think you understand it in some small way, because I really do think it's a book that, like, if you like how I think, you'll like it because you're in my brain a lot. And if you don't, it'll probably be really annoying. But it's really my own wrestling with not just the stories women get about what it means to make a good life, but also like once you have a bit of a story, how do you write it in a way that you're able to live with? And I think part of this book is understanding, like, WTF, what happened, that I went from being supposedly happily child-free to parenting three lovely ladies. But I never set out to do that. And even now, I know there are probably some sentences in the book that explain that, but when people ask, I'm getting more and more comfortable with just saying, I know, isn't that interesting? I don't know, isn't that interesting? I can't fully explain it still. So I hope the book is an invitation to anyone who's struggling to make peace with their story. That data and research are a fun way to do that. Listening to other people's stories, which I do a lot of in the book, is another way to do that. But then, yeah, trying to pin your life to the page like taxidermy can be healing, even if it doesn't give you like a really great soundbite to explain your life. It's worth examining. It's worth trying to tell a truer, kinder, weirder story.
You do include other people's stories, so it's not just your own. How did you go about finding the people to talk to and deciding which ones to use, which people to keep the real names, which ones to not? Like, there's a whole bunch of other characters here.
Yeah, well, it seemed to me that part of the thing we lose when there's a dominant narrative is we lose all of the surly, tender alternative stories that exist out there, but they just haven't been told. And so I really wanted to primarily privilege the stories of the childless, the child-free, and people making unlikely families, because I felt like those stories hadn't been valorized as like a good life, a life well lived. So it felt important to me to celebrate those as a corrective to the over celebration of motherhood. I'm really lucky to have friends who are living really big, beautiful, childless, child-free, unlikely lives. But also, strangely, there really are a lot of them in my local church. So I realized early on that there were, of course, enough people across the country and globe that I could have done an open call, but it felt helpfully limiting to say, I'm going to look around at the stories in my own life that I actually haven't fully teased out, and start with those people, start close in, as the poet David White says. Perhaps as an invitation to other people that I think these stories are more common than we think. It was amazing how many women I sat down with who are like, I've actually never talked about this before. And I'm like, that's so weird because we were both child-free or childless or making unlikely family together for like a decade. And like, yet we didn't find common language to parse out, like, how did this happen? Was it choice? Was it chance? Was it circumstance? Was it, as my friend Janelle says in the book, like a spicy combination or spicy cocktail of the three of them? So I think there is something really healing about starting with the people I knew. And then there are a couple authors and people that have written more publicly about this that I included. So people in my professional circle too. Yeah, but I think really, again, the invitation is to encourage anyone to say, like, I think these stories are becoming more common than we think. You probably know people closer to you than you imagine that have been affected by not just the mother scripts, but the demonization of the childless. And yeah, how can we celebrate the things about their lives and our own lives that have really gone under celebrated and missed out on because we've been so committed to this like marriage, motherhood, white picket fence narrative of adulthood.
Did you feel like in finding these stories around you that you built a new community out of it?
In some small way, yes. Like for instance, I have a newsletter called Good For You News where we celebrate the less shiny bits of a life well lived. And so early on in the process, we had a Good For You dinner where a lot of the women that ended up in the book, and actually this story is in the book, but a lot of the women that ended up in the book met for dinner at this very generous host's house and had like this night that felt like a wedding, where we were like marrying ourselves and reparenting ourselves, and revalorizing friend love instead of mother love as like one of the greatest of all times. But that was a one night thing. So it's been interesting. One of the happy accidents of the book is that a lot of the people I interviewed that didn't know one another, I hope, have come to fall a little bit in love with each other. Oh, when you asked like how many use their real names, like all but one used their real names, chose to use their real names in the book, because I think they were so desperate to like wave a flag that said, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm not embarrassed. I'm not embarrassed. And the only one that didn't was for professional reasons. And so that felt really important. But on the other hand, it rekindled my love for the people in my life that are going off script. And I continue to be very fascinated and I hope empathetic towards people that are mothering in more traditional ways. But really my people continue to be are a lot of women that don't have children living under their roof, because those are the people that are cultivating lives of availability and attention, and to have more margin in their lives right now to invest in our friendship in ways that feel really good and satisfying to me. So I'm just really in love with these women. And every time I tried to write a chapter, it was like all about them. And then I'd give it to someone to read and they'd be like, oh, what about you though? And I'm like, damn it. Fine. I'll put a little less about them in here. Yeah. So that was probably one of the most delicious parts about writing the book.
What was your writing process like for this book?
Oh, again, pandemic times. What can I remember? I mean, a lot of it, some of it I recommend and some of it I don't. I need really large swaths of time to write. So the people that are like, I wake up before anyone else in my house gets up and I write. I'm like, oh, I need like 10 hours of sleep a night. Like no one No one in my house sleeps as much as I do, so that's not going to work. And two, people that are like, yeah, you can get a lot done in an hour. And I'm like, I can't actually. I get like 50 words done in an hour, and 50 words does not a book make. So I really had to, what do they call it in social media language? Chunking or batching? It almost felt like I had to like batch days, like batch book days. We're like, all right, this is the day that I'm going to write this section, and this is how many words I want. And I bet you 30% of the time I met that goal. But that's fine, right? I had a lot of backup days. Yeah, so it looked like a lot of solitude. And again, I think that was both really lovely and really soul crushing, because there wasn't a lot of input in the process other than my own brain, and of course the beautiful publishing people that were helping the project along. So it was yeah, really luxurious and really myopic at times.
Did you get any really great writing advice through this process that helped you? Or did you learn any like lessons on your process and how to like fine tune it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the thing I'll take into whatever project I write next, a writing mentor of mine, Lauren Winner, who has also written, I'm going to put myself in her same category, also written beautiful spiritual memoirs. She, one very early on told me there are too many cooks in the kitchen. You're actually asking too many people what they think you should be writing. And you need to write 50 pages without input and then see what you have. So this book was actually shopped around, I think 2 rounds total. And it was very different what I proposed in the second round than the first round. And so I think that was really helpful advice to get, because I'm so attuned to what the market wants, what other people need, how can I be helpful? And I think I'm really trying in my writing to continue to lean into like a beautiful uselessness. Like I need to figure out other ways to make money so that my writing can be beautifully useless, and not have to always meet a felt need, but actually just be cagey, gorgeous words strung together for my own pleasure. And if they impact someone else, great. And if they don't, that's fine too. So that seems to be the new frontier: is advice, too many cooks in the kitchen. Remedy, can I cook something that tastes divine to me and me alone, and is that enough?
That's a real good thought process.
We'll see if I can do it.
I mean, going into NaNoWriMo next month, it's like, oh, I'm gonna share that with my friends.
Oh, please do. Please do. We should all be more beautifully useless.
Do you have anything else you want to talk about the book or book writing?
Oh, it's like a choose your own adventure question. I think that this book is really about like everyone can be a co-author of their own story. I'm not arrogant enough to think I'm the author of my own story, and I don't mean any disrespect if you are. It's just like my life hasn't turned out how I hoped, and so I think it's clear there's another storyline happening that I can't quite control. But I do get some agency, and my work is to find the sliver of agency that I do have as this like fragile, tender, vulnerable human being, and write that story that's big enough for me and the person I'm becoming, but also generous enough that other people wouldn't feel excluded or devalued or unseen in the way I talk about the things that are significant to me. And so a lot of this book is an invitation to speak for ourselves, that like this universal youing of one another is just not helpful. The mother of all mother scripts, I identify in the book as like, you don't know love until you become a mother. And I'm like, listen, that's really offensive. And and if you truly had that experience in becoming a parent, okay, tell me about it, but speak for yourself using I language. And I'm going to need you to get real specific on the details because I can't deal in cliches right now. So why don't you tell me your story of the light switch that went off for you? And I'll tell you my story about how I feel like kind of the same asshole I was before I became a parent. And that's comforting to me, maybe in the same way that it's comforting to you that you are a totally new person. I don't know, but can we talk about it in a way where we both feel like we come away and are like, yeah, I've got empathy for that story. And I felt validated and seen in my own story. So whether you're a writer or not, I just think this invitation to explore what actually is a life-giving story for you to tell about your life is just an important one for any person to investigate.
Since this is literary hype, what books are you hyped about right now?
I just read some like epic books. Oh, but I'm really bad at remembering names. Okay, I'm gonna name the books. Maybe I'll name them really slowly so I can look up the authors. Okay, The Great Circle was one of them, by Maggie Shipstead. Loved that one. The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois by Honoré Fanon Jeffers was another one. Those ones took me a really long time to finish, but it was really delicious if you need like a subject change. Both of those were really epic, beautiful ancestral stories. And then other books like in the genre of motherhood or not motherhood or alternative kinds of motherhood. I love Sarah Santillas, Stranger Care. Sarah's featured in the book. It's a beautiful book about non-biological mothering. Courtney Martin's Learning in Public is about being a biological mom who cares deeply about the common good and wants to like reject that idea that my sole job as a parent is to provide the best life for my own child. Highly recommend that one. And then a book that was really formative for me in writing Someone Other Than a Mother was a book called Revolutionary Mothering. And there's an essay in there by Alexis Pauline Gumbs on queer mothering and mothering as a verb that anyone can embody, regardless of gender, but that it's really this like revolutionary action. I think was the very first thing I read that I was like, oh, there's something beyond straight rejection of the mother word or the mothering tropes that could actually be really life-giving for some people and maybe even for me. And so that book really rocked my world.
Well, thank you so much for opening up about your story and sharing about your book. It's a fascinating read. Whether or not you agree with all of it or not, it's still entirely fascinating. But thank you so much for your time and joining me on the show.
Oh, thanks. Great questions. What a pleasure.
Thanks to Erin for joining me to talk about Someone Other Than a Mother. If you're interested in checking out this book, there will be a link to it in the description below so you can get your hands on a copy. It's really fascinating read, so I recommend checking it out, especially if you are a woman without kids. Like, this is a lot of really relatable information. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. It really does help things out. And until next time, I'll see you later.